The morning sun hadn't yet cleared the eastern ridge when Sarah Mitchell stepped onto the weathered porch of the Double M Ranch house, coffee mug warming her calloused hands. September in Montana painted the world in shades of amber and rust, the aspens beginning their annual transformation along the creek bottom. She breathed deep, taking in the crisp air that carried the scent of pine and sage and that peculiar earthiness that came just before autumn fully claimed the land. At 42, Sarah had spent half her life on this ranch, first as Tom Mitchell's wife, and now, 5 years after his passing, as its sole keeper. The Double M sprawled across 3,000 acres of rolling hills and pine forests, grazing land for their modest herd of cattle and home to the dozen horses that Tom had loved almost as much as he'd loved her. Almost. She smiled at the memory, then turned her attention to the corrals where movement caught her eye. Copper, Tom's favorite gelding, stood at the fence line, ears pricked forward, staring intently toward the eastern pasture. The 16-year-old quarter horse was the color of a new penny in sunlight, with a blaze down his face and 3 white socks that had reminded Tom of mismatched footwear. "What is it, boy?" Sarah called, though she was too far for the horse to hear. Copper had been restless lately, she'd noticed. More than restless, almost anxious, which was unusual for the typically steady mount. Tom had trained him from a colt, and the horse had the kind of gentle, reliable temperament that made him perfect for teaching nervous riders or carrying children. Sarah herself had learned to trust horses again on Copper's broad back after a childhood fall had left her wary of anything larger than a pony. She finished her coffee and headed to the barn to start morning chores. The ranch didn't run itself, though some days Sarah wondered if it ran her instead. Her hired hand, Miguel Reyes, would arrive by 7, and together they'd check the fence line in the north pasture where they'd spotted some sagging wire yesterday. After that, she needed to call the vet about vaccinations for the foals, review the accounts that were somehow always behind, and her phone buzzed in her pocket. The screen showed a number she didn't recognize, but the area code was local. "Double M Ranch," she answered, wedging the phone against her shoulder as she measured grain into buckets. "This is Deputy Frank Morrison with the County Sheriff's Office."
Sarah's hands stilled. Calls from law enforcement were never routine, not out here where neighbors were separated by miles, and the nearest town was a 40-minute drive. "Yes, Deputy, what can I do for you?" "We've got a situation developing, and Sheriff Dawson asked me to contact all the ranches in your area. A child went missing last night from the Whitetail Creek campground. 2-year-old boy named Ethan Parker. Family was camping, and he wandered off sometime around dusk. We've had search teams out all night, but no sign yet." Sarah's stomach clenched. 2 years old. Dear God. How far is Whitetail Creek from here? "About 8 miles as the crow flies, but the terrain between there and your property is pretty rough. Lots of ravines and dense forest. We're organizing a grid search and wanted to alert property owners in case the boy somehow made it that far. Could you keep an eye out? Maybe check your outbuildings?" "Of course. I'll start searching right away. Do you need volunteers for the search parties?" "We've got pretty good numbers right now, but if we don't find him soon, we'll put out a broader call. Kids wearing red pajamas with dinosaurs on them, brown hair about 3 feet tall. His parents are, well, you can imagine. I'll call if I see anything," Sarah promised. She stood for a moment after disconnecting, her breakfast sitting heavy in her stomach. A 2-year-old alone in this wilderness overnight. The temperatures had dropped into the low 40s. If the boy had wandered into the forest, there were ravines where he could fall, streams where he could wade in and get swept away by the current, and then there were the animals, coyotes, bears, mountain lions. She pushed those thoughts aside and began moving with purpose. First, she'd check the barn, the equipment sheds, the hay storage. Children were drawn to buildings, to the shelter they provided. Then she'd saddle up and ride the eastern boundary of her property, the section closest to Whitetail Creek. Sarah was pulling open the tack room door when she heard the truck. Miguel's ancient Ford rattled up the drive, arriving 20 minutes early as he often did. The 63-year-old former rodeo rider had worked for Tom years ago and had shown up the week after the funeral asking if she needed help. She'd hired him on the spot, grateful for both his skill and his quiet company. "Morning, boss," Miguel called, climbing out of the truck. Then he took a closer look at her face. "What's wrong?" She told him quickly, and his weathered features creased with concern. "A baby in those woods alone. We should get out there." "I'm going to ride the east section. Can you check all the buildings here, then maybe take the ATV and cover the logging roads on the north property?" "See, I'll start now." Sarah headed back to the tack room and gathered Copper's saddle and bridle. The gelding stood at his fence, still staring eastward, still with that strange tension in his body. When she approached with his tack, he whickered and pressed his nose into her chest, something he did when he wanted her attention. "I know, buddy. We're going for a ride. Maybe you can help me find something important."
Saddling Copper was an automatic routine, one her hands knew by heart. She worked quickly, checking the cinch, adjusting the stirrups, sliding the bridle over his ears. The horse stood perfectly still, but his ears never stopped moving, constantly flicking toward the east. Sarah swung into the saddle, settling into the familiar creak of leather. She'd packed a small bag with water, a first aid kit, her phone, and a blanket. If they found the boy, when they found him, she corrected herself firmly, he'd be cold and frightened. They started at a trot across the home pasture, Copper's stride smooth and ground covering. The morning sun was fully up now, promising a warm day, though the shadows under the pines still held the night's chill. Sarah tried to imagine how far an exhausted, frightened 2-year-old could travel in the dark. Not far, surely. But children were surprising. She'd heard stories of lost kids found miles from where they disappeared, their tiny legs carrying them farther than anyone thought possible on sheer panic and confusion. The eastern boundary of the Double M was marked by a rugged section of land, where the relatively gentle hills of the ranch gave way to steeper terrain. A deep ravine cut through this area, carved by centuries of snowmelt and rainfall, creating a gash in the earth that ranged from 15 to 30 feet deep. Dense pines crowded the ravine's edge, and at the bottom, a rocky seasonal creek bed wound through the shadows. Sarah had always avoided riding too close to the ravine. It was dangerous country, with loose rocks and sudden drop-offs hidden by brush. The cattle avoided it too, instinctively staying to safer ground. They were perhaps a mile from the ravine when Copper's behavior changed. The horse's head came up sharply, and his pace quickened without any cue from Sarah. His ears locked forward, pointing like compass needles toward something she couldn't yet see or hear. A low rumbling sound came from his chest, not quite a whinny, but a vocalization she'd never heard from him before. "Easy, boy," Sarah said, but Copper was already breaking into a canter. She could have stopped him. She was a confident enough rider for that, but something in the horse's urgency made her loosen her grip on the reins instead. Copper had been Tom's horse, trained to work cattle, to navigate rough country, to be trusted. If he sensed something, she should pay attention. They plunged into a grove of pines, branches catching at Sarah's jacket. She ducked low over Copper's neck, trusting him to pick the path. His hooves thundered over the pine needle carpet, and then they burst through the tree line into a clearing. The ravine lay ahead, perhaps 50 yards away. Copper didn't slow down. "Whoa!" Sarah called, pulling back on the reins, suddenly alarmed. But the horse fought her, tossing his head and powering forward. She'd never known him to ignore commands like this, to fight the bit with such determination. 20 yards from the ravine's edge, Sarah managed to bring him to a halt, only by turning him in a tight circle and backing him up. The moment she stopped directing him, Copper lunged forward again, nearly unseating her.
"Copper, what the hell has gotten into you?" The horse was frantic now, dancing sideways, tossing his head, trying to reach the ravine. The whites of his eyes showed, and foam flecked his mouth where the bit pulled at the corners. Sarah had seen horses panic before, had seen them in the grip of fear or pain, but this was different. Copper wasn't afraid. He was desperate. Desperate to reach something.
Sarah's heart began to pound. She dismounted quickly, keeping hold of the reins. Copper immediately began pulling toward the ravine, dragging her along. For a 1,000-pound animal, he was being relatively gentle. He could have easily yanked the reins from her hands or trampled her in his urgency, but he was absolutely insistent. Okay, Sarah said, letting him lead her forward. Show me. What is it? They approached the ravine's edge carefully, Sarah mindful of her footing on the loose rock and hard-packed earth. The lip of the ravine was sharp here, the ground falling away suddenly into shadow. Copper planted his feet and refused to go closer, but he stretched his neck out over the edge and whinnied, a loud, clear call that echoed off the ravine walls. Sarah knelt carefully, crawling the last few feet on her hands and knees to peer over the edge. At first, she saw only rock and shadow, the skeletal remains of long-dead trees that had fallen into the ravine, patches of scrub brush clinging to the steep walls. Then, about 20 feet below and slightly to the left, she saw it. Red fabric, a small splash of color against the gray-brown earth. "Oh, God," Sarah breathed. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands, punching in the number Deputy Morrison had called from. It rang once, twice, 3 times, each ring an eternity. "Morrison? This is Sarah Mitchell at the Double M. I found him. I found the boy. He's in a ravine on my eastern property line, about 20 feet down. I can see red pajamas, but I can't see if he's... Is he moving? Can you see him breathing?" Sarah leaned farther over the edge, her heart hammering. The small bundle of red fabric was wedged against the base of a dead pine trunk. She stared hard, willing herself to see movement, any movement at all. There, the tiniest shift, a small arm moving. Yes, he moved. He's alive. But he's down in a ravine and I don't know how badly hurt or... "You did good, ma'am. You found him. Now just stay there and keep eyes on him. Help is coming." Sarah ended the call and sat back from the edge, her legs suddenly weak. Behind her, Copper whinnied again, and when she turned to look at him, the horse was staring down into the ravine, his whole body quivering with tension. "You knew," Sarah said, wonder-struck. "You knew he was here? How did you know?" Copper whickered softly and took a step closer to her, lowering his head to touch her shoulder with his nose. Sarah reached up to stroke his neck, her hand trembling. "Good boy, such a good boy." She crawled back to the edge, needing to keep visual contact with the child. From this angle, she could see a bit more. He was lying on his side, one arm flung out, his small body so still that terror kept clawing at her chest. A 2-year-old. Someone's baby, lost and alone in the dark, falling into this ravine. How long had he been crying before exhaustion or injury silenced him? Had he called for his mother, for help that didn't come through the long, cold night? "Ethan!" Sarah called down, her voice echoing strangely off the ravine walls. "Ethan, can you hear me? Help is coming, sweetheart. You're going to be okay." No response. The small body didn't stir. Sarah pulled out her phone again and called Miguel, telling him what had happened, where to direct the search and rescue team. Then she settled in to wait, keeping watch over a child she'd never met in a place she'd found only because a horse refused to give up. The wait felt endless, though her phone told her only 18 minutes had passed when she heard engines in the distance. Minutes later, 3 sheriff's department vehicles and a search and rescue truck bounced across the pasture, followed by an ambulance that had to park farther back where the ground was more stable.
Deputy Morrison reached her first, a tall man in his 30s with kind eyes and a calm demeanor that Sarah immediately appreciated. Behind him came Sheriff Roy Dawson, whom Sarah knew slightly from church, and a team of 6 search and rescue volunteers in technical gear. "Mrs. Mitchell," Morrison said, "you're the hero of the hour." "Not me," Sarah said, gesturing to Copper. "Him. He led me here. He wouldn't stop until we reached this spot." The deputy glanced at the horse with interest, but the search and rescue team leader, a compact woman named Janet Chen, was already assessing the ravine. 20 feet down, you said? Can you show me exactly where?" Sarah pointed, and Janet leaned over carefully, studying the terrain. 2 of her team members were already unpacking ropes and harnesses. "We can get down there, but we're going to need to rig a proper anchor and belay system. Give us about 10 minutes to set up." Those 10 minutes felt longer than the first 18. Sarah stood back as the team worked with efficient precision, pounding anchors into the ground, testing their ropes, checking each other's harnesses and carabiners. A second ambulance arrived, this one carrying a paramedic trained in technical rescue.
Then, from the direction of the ranch road, a small sedan came racing across the pasture, driving far too fast for the rough ground. It skidded to a stop, and a man and woman burst out of the vehicle. "Where is he?" the woman cried. "Where's my baby?" Sheriff Dawson intercepted them, his hands raised in a calming gesture. "Mr. and Mrs. Parker, we've located Ethan and he's alive. The rescue team is going down right now." The woman, young, maybe 30, with tangled blonde hair and eyes red from crying, tried to push past the sheriff toward the ravine. "I need to see him. Ethan, Mommy's here." "Ma'am, I know this is hard, but you need to let the professionals do their job. The ravine edge is unstable, and we can't risk—" "I don't care about risk. That's my son." Sarah found herself moving forward, reaching out to touch the woman's arm. "Mrs. Parker, I'm Sarah Mitchell. I found Ethan. He moved just before I called it in. He's alive and help is with him right now. But your son needs you to be here safe so when they bring him up, you can hold him, okay?" The woman's eyes locked on Sarah's face, desperate and searching. "You saw him? You really saw him move?" "I did. And my horse, he knew Ethan was down there. Animals have senses we don't. If Copper believed your son was alive, then he is." It was perhaps an overpromise, more hope than certainty, but Mrs. Parker latched onto it like a lifeline. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and let her husband pull her into an embrace. "They're going down now," Sheriff Dawson announced. Everyone's attention turned to the ravine. Janet Chen and the paramedic, whose name tag read J. Torres, descended in tandem, their movements controlled and precise as the belay team managed the ropes from above. It took less than a minute for them to reach the bottom, though it felt much longer. Sarah held her breath as Janet and Torres moved to the small red bundle. They blocked her view as they bent over the child, and the seconds stretched out, torturous in their length. Then Torres looked up at the rim of the ravine and gave a thumbs up. "He's alive," someone shouted, and Mrs. Parker collapsed against her husband, sobbing. The rescue team worked quickly, Torres doing a rapid assessment, while Janet prepared a special harness designed for small children. She could hear fragments of their communication through the radio one of the ground crew held. Responsive to voice, pupils reactive, abrasions and contusions, possible hypothermia, need to immobilize the left arm. It took another 10 minutes to secure Ethan in the harness and bring him up. The toddler was awake now, crying weakly, a sound that was somehow more reassuring than silence. As soon as Torres brought him over the rim, Mrs. Parker rushed forward, and the paramedic carefully transferred the small blanket-wrapped bundle into her arms. "Mama," Ethan whimpered, and his mother collapsed to her knees, rocking him and weeping. Sarah turned away from the reunion, giving the family privacy in their moment of overwhelming relief. She found herself looking at Copper instead, at the horse who had somehow known, who had refused to give up. "Ma'am?" Sarah turned to find Deputy Morrison approaching. "Yes?" Sheriff Dawson would like to get your statement about how you located the boy, and the media is going to want to talk to you. This is going to be big news." "I don't need media attention," Sarah said firmly. "I just want to make sure that little boy is okay." "He's in good shape, considering," Taurus said, joining them. He descended the ravine after handing off Ethan. "Hypothermic, definitely. Badly bruised, and his left arm is likely fractured. Dehydrated, but he's alert and aware, and there's no sign of serious head trauma. He's incredibly lucky." "How did he survive the fall?" Sarah asked. "Best we can figure, he slid down rather than fell straight. Probably happened in the dark. He walked right over the edge, but the slope caught him, and he rolled. That dead tree trunk stopped him from going all the way to the bottom. It probably saved his life." Sarah glanced back at the ravine, at the 20-foot drop that could have easily killed a small child. Instead, Ethan Parker would go home to his family, would grow up, would live. "How did you know to look here?" Morrison asked. "This is pretty remote, and the campground is miles away." Sarah hesitated, knowing how it would sound. "My horse. He led me here." "Copper, he was acting strangely all morning, staring toward the east, anxious. When I took him out to search, he brought me straight to this spot. He wouldn't leave. He knew something was here." Morrison's eyebrows rose, but Sheriff Dawson, who had been listening, nodded slowly. "I've seen stranger things. Had a case 10 years back where a dog led us to a missing hiker. Animals know things we don't." "How far away could a horse smell a human?" Morrison wondered aloud. "Depends. Wind conditions, terrain. But horses have excellent hearing, too. Maybe the kid was crying earlier and your horse heard it." "Maybe." But Sarah remembered Copper's behavior from early morning, before she had even known Ethan was missing. The horse had been focused on the east from dawn, maybe earlier. The ambulance crew was loading Ethan into their vehicle, Mrs. Parker climbing in beside her son, while Mr. Parker followed in their car. Before they left, Mrs. Parker leaned out of the ambulance door. "Mrs. Mitchell?" Sarah walked over. Up close, she could see how young Mrs. Parker was, barely out of her 20s, her face drawn with exhaustion and lingering fear. "Thank you. Thank you for finding my baby. I don't know how. I can't—" She couldn't finish, overcome with emotion. "I'm just glad he's okay," Sarah said simply. "You focus on him now." "Your horse? The officer said it was your horse who found him. Would it be okay if I said thank you to him too?" Sarah blinked, surprised, then nodded. "Of course." She led Mrs. Parker over to where Miguel was holding Copper's reins. The horse stood quietly, his earlier agitation gone, though his ears still flicked toward the ambulance where Ethan was. Mrs. Parker reached out with a tentative hand, stroking Copper's neck. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for finding my son." Copper lowered his head, blowing out a soft breath through his nostrils. For just a moment, woman and horse stood together in silent communication. Then Mrs. Parker stepped back, tears streaming down her face, and returned to the ambulance. As the vehicle pulled away, lights flashing but sirens silent, Sarah felt something shift in her chest. A settling, a rightness. "He's a good horse," Miguel said quietly. "Tom trained him well." "Tom did," Sarah agreed. But she was thinking about something more than training, something deeper than commands and cues. The search and rescue team packed up their equipment, and Sheriff Dawson took Sarah's statement, noting down times and details. By the time everyone had left and Sarah and Miguel rode back toward the ranch house, it was past noon. "You going to tell the TV people?" Miguel asked as they unsaddled the horses. "I'd rather not," Sarah admitted. "This isn't about me." "They'll come anyway," Miguel predicted.
Small town, missing kid, dramatic rescue. That's news. He was right, of course. By 3 o'clock, a news van from the regional television station was parked in her driveway, and a young reporter with perfect hair was asking if she'd give an interview. "I'd really prefer not to," Sarah said. "The important thing is that Ethan Parker is safe." "Just a few minutes of your time," the reporter pressed. "People want to know how you found him, how your horse knew." Sarah hesitated. She didn't want attention, didn't want cameras and questions. But maybe there was something worth sharing. Not about her, but about Copper. About the bond between humans and animals. About trust and instinct. "All right," she said finally, "but only if you can do the interview here, with Copper in the shot. He's the real hero." The reporter agreed eagerly, and they set up near the corral where Copper grazed peacefully, apparently unconcerned with his newfound fame. Sarah tried to explain what had happened, how the horse had behaved, how he'd led her to the ravine. "What do you think Copper sensed?" the reporter asked, microphone thrust forward. "I don't know," Sarah said honestly. "Maybe he heard something we couldn't. Maybe he smelled something on the wind. Horses have senses far more acute than ours. Or maybe," she paused, stroking Copper's neck, "maybe it's something we can't measure or explain. A kind of knowing. This horse belonged to your late husband, is that right?" Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice for a moment. "Tom raised Copper from a colt. He always said this horse had a big heart. Today proved him right." The interview went on for a few more minutes, but Sarah barely heard her own responses. She was too aware of Copper beside her, his solid warmth, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. This horse, who had loved Tom and whom Tom had loved, had saved a child's life today. After the news crew left, Sarah remained in the corral with Copper for a long time, just being with him in the golden afternoon light. She thought about Tom, about the ranch, about the life she'd built here. Some days were just about survival, about getting through. But some days, like today, were about something more. "Thank you," she whispered into Copper's mane, "for whatever made you know, for not giving up. Thank you." The horse turned his head to look at her with one dark, liquid eye. Then he returned to grazing, as if saving a child's life was simply part of a day's work.